heart that hurts. I want to spend my life mending broken people. I want to spend my life mending broken people. Hello and welcome to 3ABN Today Live. This is a program where you might be wondering, why do I have on so many colors? Well, that's the time of year it is, July 4th, remembering our nation in its greatness. And so I've dressed in an appropriate attire to celebrate this time with you. So for that reason, since I've gone through so much to entertain you, sit down for the next 2 hours and we will be blessed by walking through the scriptural as well as political, religious climate in America and the world, and find out what God will have us to do. I'm excited about our guest for the program, Lincoln Steed. Good to have you here, Lincoln.
Always a pleasure.
You know, you are one of my favorites whenever we get together and talk about religious liberty and what's happening in the world politically. So give us a brief overview of what's been happening in your life lately.
My life? It's all about liberty.
All about liberty.
And Liberty Magazine, but of course, as we'll talk on this program, I'm just fascinated by what's happening globally.
That's right.
Religion is top of the list on what's happening.
That's right.
It's dynamic, not always good, but always active. This is not a time of lack of faith. It's often faith misdirected, but there's a lot of religious activity.
And we're going to talk about that in this program. There's so many directions to talk about when it comes to religion, politics, society, how we got started, where we're headed. And in the middle of that, there's some speculation, but we have enough Bible and knowledge to know that speculation is not always without support. So we'll try our best to give it all the support we need. But those of you that are watching and listening to the program, I want to thank you for your prayers and financial support of this network. We believe 3ABN is ordained of God to continue a work in the earth, getting people ready for the coming of the Lord. And religion and politics is very much a part of it, but there is a delicate balance, and we'll try our best to be neutral tonight, but also we'll stand firmly on the Word of God and give you an overview of what's happening in America, where we've come from, where are we headed as a nation, where are we headed as a world. The song that we're going to share with you before we get into our program is one of my favorites. Yvonne Lewis is going to bless you with a song. It's very appropriate for this time of year. It's called America, We Are One.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
To
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
That makes your blood flow, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Boy,
Exciting.
what a beginning to a program. America, we are one. When I hear that song, I think of this great nation and what we are continuing to go through to maintain the stability, the tranquility in a society that's divided as well as united. But praise the Lord, our flag is still there.
Well, you know, watching that item reminds me that the real secret to the United States is not always what it's done or the elements of its history, but it's the dream.
That's right.
It's a vision of freedom. It's a vision of a God-blessed nation, not a religious republic,
Right.
but a religious society.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to make sure that we keep to that dream. And of course, the First Amendment, religious freedom, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you read Liberty magazine, there's plenty of examples we give of where these things are not fully lived up to. But the dream, to use Tennyson's poem, the dream can draw us on.
That's
the
right.
gleam.
Wow, that's good. So this dream that we have in America, we want to maintain that it doesn't become a nightmare.
Right.
Because if we lose the things that hold us together and begin to ignore, like our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our Declaration of Independence, which for some people they all run together. We don't, and many people in our society don't even know what those things are any longer.
And you and I were talking about that before this program. But you know, I've lived most of my life in this country, and I studied with relish the history of the United States and American government and so on. And I've come to believe that very few American citizens, residents, know adequately the Constitution, know their history, but they don't know the Constitution. And most times when people say or refer to the Constitution, what they're thinking of is the Declaration of Independence, which has very high flown language, and the language of liberation from despotism and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's valid, but it's not a formal document established by the people.
Mm-hmm.
And the Constitution is. And ironically, in the Constitution, religion, while it's the backdrop, it's not stated very clearly.
Mm.
It's only half an amendment and one little clause elsewhere in the Constitution. It's the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law establishing religion, nor prevent the free exercise thereof. And then the other one, no religious test for public office, which we've forgotten.
That's right.
Because every presidential election, there's great debate about whether someone is Christian enough, or if even a Mormon ran recently, and not good to be president. And goodness knows if we had a non-Christian running for president, would that even be accepted?
That's right.
But that in itself doesn't diminish the underlying, undergirding Christian principles and the Western Christian concepts that came across the ocean from England, but by way of the whole Reformation, and informed the establishment of this quite unique republic.
That's right. And our country rose up in a time of tyranny, really.
Well, they called it tyranny. It's all relative. And in many ways, not that we live under a tyrannical regime now, but many of the things that were objectionable in the 1770s, we accept easily now.
Right.
So we need to reassert the principles of independence and of the sovereignty of the individual. This was a country that was predicated on the rights of the individual, the rights of the people, and that the government acts only on the authority given by the people.
Right.
You know,
Not the other way around.
no, but if you watch television now, you hear leaders speaking as though, we are their serfs, we are their charge. That's not really the way it goes.
No.
They should be at the disposition of the people.
That's right. It's by the people, for the people.
Right.
It's not a top-down, it's a bottom-up.
Right.
And
it's harder to maintain when you have 330 million or so people. There's no question that the dynamic of early America was small-town government, and you knew your legislator more personally. But that doesn't mean it can't work now. It's just that we have to work harder at maintaining that original dream, I think.
What I'd like to do is go back to, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 13, because it's just such a middle point in the book of Revelation that brings together two powers. It somewhat previews the rise of America and what was happening during the time that it was born, even though this nation was already inhabited before we came here. But it kind of gives us a picture of these two beasts in Revelation chapter 13, the one rising out of the sea.
We say an empty land. It wasn't quite empty.
It wasn't empty.
But it was empty as far as Western culture and
Right.
society were concerned. It was unknown. Wasn't organized in the same way. So it wasn't one nation giving form to another. It was something new established on a far land.
And Revelation 12 and 13 are two. When we were in Washington a number of years ago, when the Pope came to Washington to speak, remember that?
Yes.
We did a lot of walking to get to that speech. What was amazing to me is as we stood on the lawn and listened to Pope Francis address multi-ethnicity, multi-denominational people, it was amazing. I went from person to person and intentionally asked, what is your religious background? And regardless of the denomination, so many people said, this is our Pope. And it was amazing to me that it resonated that way, because we forgot to some degree the picture drawn here in Revelation chapter 13, the two beasts of Revelation 13.
Well, what we've forgotten as a nation is our Protestant heritage.
Right.
It's not written into the Constitution, but it really is presumed by the peoples that came across, many of them escaping religious persecution, all of them from England, with a view of what the Reformation meant.
That's right.
And the negative result of some of that through the US history has often been profound anti-Catholicism, which no one would defend or encourage. That was bad.
Right.
But I think, like me, you had to have been impressed with the Pope speaking to Congress and then standing like a conquering hero,
Right.
the world is turned on its axis, and maybe not for the best.
Right.
Because to sort of wipe away the whole Reformation, the sense of Protestant fervor that informed many of the early settlements of the U.S., and now see the Pope as sort of the religious leader of the world, perhaps even the U.S., is not safe. It's not right.
And it's an erosion that took some time. It didn't just happen overnight.
Oh, no.
You know, we saw this indelicate. I go back in my mind to when the wall came down in Europe, Western Europe, when there was a coalition. It was called the Unholy Alliance. Time magazine with President Reagan and at the time Pope John Paul II. How this unity for the demise of communism was so applauded by the world, but many people didn't really know what was behind that whole push.
And of course, you can easily study history. While the issue in Poland was the beginning of the unraveling of the whole communist world, the Eastern European part of it at least, you can see the trends well before. It was rotten at its core. It was really, even the military confrontation between the US and Russia was really a fight against a paper target. He is an Oriental image. And yes, Christianity, Protestantism has been morphing and changing. We've gone through the God is dead era in the back around the 60s, 50s and 60s. Then we're now in a phase where we don't want religious conflicts. We're all fine. We'll reinvent Christianity as sort of some mythical kumbaya period, maybe in the Roman Empire, forgetting. By the way, I love history. Forgetting. Well, there's Protestantism within Christianity, and the Church of Rome still exists. We forget the great schism between the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Eastern and the Western churches.
That's right.
That's never been healed. So there's reasons to question, why do we have this element? And Protestantism is now sort of balkanized into many factions. But at root, it was a reverence for the Word of God and for the authority of the individual and their conscience before God.
That's right.
Which is not what we see with the leftover of the Roman Empire through the Roman Catholic Church. Wonderful people there, but as a system, it takes us back before the American Revolution, takes us back before the Reformation to the Dark Ages.
That's right. And what people don't see, I'm glad you brought that up, because what people don't see is that this admiration for what Rome stands for, or what the papacy stands for, and once again, you're not referring to the people, not Catholic people. You know, majority of my family is Catholic, so we're not talking about the people, but the system itself is almost saying to us, ignore, as the New York Times article, New York Post article, in 1980. I have that article where Pope John Paul II referred to Martin Luther as a rebel German theologian.
Well, and he was within their system.
In their system. He rebelled against the norms of that world.
Yeah.
But he wasn't a rebel in the sense of, would you call a person a rebel? That's getting us back to the Bible, getting us back to the Word of God.
Well, the other term that the last few popes have used is a reformer. Although they've owned the Reformation. Maybe this is not fully appropriate, but we've lent ourselves to this direction. We celebrated the Reformation 2 years ago, 500 years since Martin Luther at least, although it was much more than Martin Luther. People should remember that. I've gone to many meetings and think tank presentations and so on, and I've discovered that they're rethinking the Reformation in a dangerous way. The first view of it, which you and I still hold, is that biblical truth had been suppressed by a combination of the Roman Empire and sort of church control and the dominance of priests. People didn't read the Bible. Before printing, they didn't have it. That's our view, that it rose up, truth rose up, and reformers, at the risk of their life, brought truth. The second view, which has really been around for a while now, is that the Reformation was really an inevitable expression of the self-determination of the Enlightenment, a secular movement, knowledge generally, where people were throwing off the constraints of religion. And that caused the Reformation. There's problems with that. The third view, though, that is being spread now, I think is troubling, especially for the United States and its religious self-view. The third view is that the Reformation was the Church of Rome self-correcting. So they've bought the reformers as their own. Then they've resurrected some earlier reformers, and there have always been reformers within the church that objected to its successors, like John Wycliffe in England. 100 years before Martin Luther was saying the same sort of things. He never left the church, but he was severely persecuted, even though he died of natural causes.
Internal opposition.
Yeah, but the idea that the Reformation, as it went separately, was wrong, and that the church itself can self-correct, that it's the mother church, we should come back to it, is not good, given that the basic principles have not changed.
That's right.
It's an assumed authority that goes beyond what God ever. Jesus never gave full authority to church leaders to, sit on a throne and act as God on earth, and to forgive the sins of human beings. That this is all a false system. Not to mention the accretion of paganism that any historian can see in the system. So, as a Protestant nation, which it once was, overwhelmingly, the United States principles in a secular enumeration will only be truly effective as it maintains this undergirding of I believe, biblical morality and of Protestant self-determination.
And when you think about it, Lincoln, the picture that's being drawn in America nowadays, when the celebration of the 500-year Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther was repositioned. That's the word I'll use. He was repositioned as a guy that, okay, well, we acknowledge what he's done, and I'm talking about the political overtone. We have a different approach to that. Martin Luther is, in fact, a hero who stood up in a society that could have easily decapitated him had they gotten hold of him. But he started a movement back to the Word of God. And now the word Protestant, I was listening to some of the church leaders, I won't mention names, but some great Protestant well-known leaders would say, can you imagine, this is a quote, can you imagine we have been protesting for 500 years? Do you want to be remembered as a protester? I mean, was it? And they made it seem as though that's a horrible terminology to use, when in fact, protesting against darkness is what Martin Luther did. Protesting against many of the authorities, the 95 Theses, the authority of the church, the preeminence of an individual, the supremacy of an individual.
Well, let's go to the Bible. The Bible, speaking in an end-time context, affirms those that sigh and cry for the abominations done in the land.
That's right, Ezekiel 9.
So as we come into a difficult time, we all need to be Protestants, not narrowly against a corrupt and older, misled church, but we need to protest against all of the unnatural order. And the Pope's onto one thing, the environment. Seventh-day Adventists should understand that. Our three angels' messages, the first one says, give honor to God who created heaven and earth.
That's right.
He's soon to come and to exact a price for those that are destroying the earth. As Paul says elsewhere, God is coming to destroy those that destroy the earth.
Actually, Revelation 11, John talked about the time has come. Here, Revelation 11, verse 18, the nations were angry, and your wrath has come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged, and that you should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Revelation 11, verse 18.
So there's an ecological concern built right into the warning message of the soon return of Christ.
That's right.
And so we're protesting against that, not condemning. Jesus said, I don't condemn you directly. You condemn yourself by your actions. But we need to raise an awareness. And back to the U.S., I think its special role for most of its history was to raise an awareness of the rights of true religion and of conscience. And we reached out and we sort of demanded at times that other people at least move toward this sort of a view. And this is one of the most serious changes in recent years. I'd say in the last 20 years, the United States, to a large degree, has dropped this requirement of those that it deals with. Remember under, I think it was Secretary Clinton, who is a person of some personal faith. I'm not criticizing her, but I remember when she went to China, she says, we will not require human rights as a prerequisite to dealing with China at this time. Now, that was a sea change because the U.S. always linked the two. Not always perfectly, because goodness knows the U.S. had serious problems particularly before the civil rights movement itself.
True.
Movement
Right.
itself.
It's in its own fabric.
This is not a perfect country. You know, I think it was Abraham Lincoln spoke about a more perfect union.
Right.
We're moving toward it. It's an ideal. But it has been a country that had a moral sensibility, even during the Cold War. That was the pitch, that we represented a Christian faith-based society versus godless communism.
That's
which
right.
was, you know, was always a one-dimensional sort of a appositional statement. But generally speaking, it was true. And I think at the moment we're in a very dangerous pass in the United States. We have a great lifestyle. We still have a relatively functioning governmental system that embodies these underlying principles. But I'm not so sure that our projection of power and influence is predicated anymore on this moral sensibility and on this deeply religious viewpoint.
And because America now has gone through a metamorphosis, at one time it was easily, and I'll use a phrase, people said easily identifiable. They looked at it as a Christian nation, but now America is a nation with Christians in it.
Right.
Because, right, so its principles are all Christian, but we are almost forcing this idea that this is a Christian nation when in fact its principles are. But this nation is anything but Christian. It's a nation with Christians in it.
We're entering into power politics, and I know U.S. history. The U.S. has always been a power player,
Right.
even under the Monroe Doctrine. Most people may have forgotten it, but you know, supposedly the Monroe Doctrine, we were hands off, but in reality, the U.S. has never been hands off.
No.
The Spanish-American War, very early on.
Almost like ventriloquism.
Right.
Somebody's moving the puppet.
The U.S. marches in wherever it wants, and a whole swathe of the Southwest was Mexico, and that story is best not told. Basically stolen
How the West
land.
was won.
What I think has changed is that now we're projecting raw power, not with a pretense of morality, like as we do this program. It's possible there'll be some direct action against Iran. Where's the morality in that? I can't see it. We all know that it's an aberrant system in Iran, but we deal with aberrant systems all the time and witness to them. Try to Saudi Arabia, good friend.
Well,
That's an aberrant system.
And we are not by any means interfering with that ally.
Like in Saudi Arabia, if you openly try to practice your faith in Saudi Arabia, as a foreigner, you'll be arrested very quickly. As a Shiite Muslim, it's dominant Sunni there, you're likely to be executed. They executed one of the top Shiite clerics recently in the public courtyard, where I think he was hung, but usually they cut the head off. They even have little drainage areas in the public square for the blood from these regular executions.
To maintain maintain the...
There's a country where we are unconcerned because we need something as a country. I understand it, but morality is not at play here. But we're acting like we have a certain right to deal against Iran. They threaten our global interests, or hegemony, to use an old communist term. But we need a little bit of modesty, I think, which Protestantism used to give.
I think this is where the word calibration comes into play, as far as I'm concerned, because you can go so far away from, let me use this phrase, from your target, that you can't see the target any longer.
Right.
And I think America, to some degree, when we're getting wrapped up in all the, well, we passed gay rights in America, but as citizens, we all have rights. And so there's this backlash that people that are religious want to, take the reins of America and bring it back into play.
Well, now you're getting to what really is the trend of our times.
Right. In
the whole world, but as we see it played out in the U.S., it's very similar. Maybe I'll start with somewhere else. In Pakistan, there's the Taliban, which were the religious students. Back in Reagan's era, we fired them up let the mullah, the imams in their case, the imams hyped them up and send them off to fight the Russians. Which we thought was good because they were godless communists. But there's not much difference structurally between the Taliban and the Sharia law that they were espousing and the resurgent political Christianity in the U.S. that wants, by hook or by crook, legislation if possible, edict if not allowable, it wants to reinstate this mythical Christianity, which, I'll put it to you, owes more to a Roman Catholic medieval model than a Protestant model.
I don't disagree, because it's being done by force in a secret way in little spots around our nation.
Even when it's open,
rising up.
it's still here. Here's the Christian mandate: live by it or suffer the consequence. On Christian radio the other day, I heard something that I thought was, their morality was good behind it, but the logic was convoluted. They were trying to say that the abortion movement, pro-abortion movement, is basically an iteration of the slavery movement. And I thought, that is a long stretch. And yet I share the radio program's abhorrence to abortion. I think a truly Christian moral society is going to be very careful of the rights of the unborn and the rights of the living.
That's right.
And yet too many Christians in the United States, especially some of those that are most active on abortion, they're not so concerned with the plight of the poor in the cities. They're not so concerned with what do you do with the unwanted children, the abused children, and so on. I believe a reverence for life, which has to come from true biblical morality, a true Protestant social sensibility, will be a little bit more than just the abortion movement.
Right.
The anti-abortion movement. I was very taken as a young man reading Albert Schweitzer's works, and he wasn't what you'd call an Orthodox Christian, but he was a Christian doctor, and his view was reverence for life. And we're back to the first angel's message. God's the life giver, the creator. We have to honor him. You know, it's not acceptable to sort of have a left behind scenario where you're going to fight the last fight against evil, literally. It's a spiritual warfare, and we need to be moderating. We need to be salt and leaven in society, changing it in this practical way in preparation for the return of Christ and this eternal kingdom, not the kingdom of God in America.
And that is what's pushing the agenda quite a bit. Let's look at a couple of the overviews that we understand. As we understand in the Bible, there's a particular position, we talk about Jesus coming back to take us to the new Jerusalem, but there's this evangelical view that people are getting ready for Christ to come to the old Jerusalem. And so some of the political moves that have been taken recently...
And it's not inconsequential, and you've given an opening to discuss this.
Okay.
The present U.S. President, Donald Trump, I think he means well. He's entered into an alliance with the so-called Christian right. And if there's one characteristic of this president, and I'm not going to defend or attack him directly, but he keeps his promises.
Right.
His campaign promises, and he made an alliance with the so-called Christian right and promised them certain things. And part of the payoff is recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which is a provocative act for most of the rest of the world. Unnecessary. The U.S. security was not furthered 1 inch by that. No. In fact, arguably negative. He's made similar statements like that. And I do think it's a very dangerous pass where people of faith are using a political leader to rush through an agenda to, quote, re-Christianize this country. You and I have spoken before, and you'll be not surprised for me to link the story of this to even before the founding of the United States.
Okay, let's go back to that. Let's go back to our forefathers. Let's go back to Revelation
1776 is the date that resonates. But really, 1789 might be a more appropriate date for the United States. 1789 was when the U.S. Constitution was ratified. The details of this country hadn't really been hammered out till that point. And when it was hammered out, a lot of the views that were at play, and Patrick Henry was one that exemplified some of the nativistic views that go back to the origin of the U.S., where they wanted religion front and center. They wanted to establish, as the Plymouth Rock settlers said, you know, the city set on a hill, this religious republic. But that was defeated then.
Yeah, but part of the challenge, though, and part of the issues back then that plague us today, it's amazing how the old has come back to the new, is people became religious to become political leaders.
Right. But let me go further back. To me, it's not just less than inconsequential, it's pivotal to understand where this view of the state came from in this new world.
All right.
England, of course, was where most of the original settlers came from. And we speak English. We're really in the Anglo procession of history, if you like. And we always say when there's a crisis, you know, that there's a special relationship between England and the US. And there is. It's worth remembering that 100 years before the American War of Independence, there was religious turmoil in England. They were not that far removed from the Reformation. It had been worked out violently at times in England. The Church of England, which was nominally Protestant, was heading back toward a Catholic manner of acting and administering the lives of the average person. And a conflict arose in England between the Puritans. Americans think Puritans are Americans. They came from England.
From England, that's right.
The Puritans, of a wide swath of doctrinal and prophetic beliefs, but all characterized by pure, holy, Bible living, back to basics. They were not really organized in the same way the Church of England. The Puritans were a growing force, upset with what was happening with the church and with the government, which was pushing that form of religion on them. When there was a political crisis, the Puritans rallied quickly and ended up becoming the major faction in a civil war against the king. And there were pitched battles. And in the end, they captured the king, put him on trial, and his crime was ignoring the rights of the individual, which is all that the US is about. And the coup de grace for him was that in frustrating the will of the people, he was plotting and planning to bring a Catholic army into England to support his cause.
Wow.
And so they beheaded him. Now, the Declaration of Independence, the people think as the Constitution, is really all about that story. When they're talking about the king and his despotism and what he had done, that argument had to be given because it was the same argument that was given in England to kill a king who, as he said in his defense, "You can't touch me, I'm put here by God." And so it was necessary with King George to prove that he was such a great despot that he had betrayed the trust of the people. I don't have it in front of me, but I know the language is very much like that he is really working against their interests, and therefore they have broken. He had broken the bonds of trust and responsibility between the ruler and the people. That's the argument that they gave in England. That was the argument brought here by a Puritan faction, which was not just 2 or 3 people.
No.
It was tens of thousands. Barely a lifetime before the American Revolution. Many of them went down south, and I could enlarge my history lesson by saying that was part of the misdirected independence that played into the Civil War.
So when we talk about going back to the faith of our fathers or the establishment of our country, what's the fragility there?
Well, it's a yin and a yang thing. First of all, it emphasizes the deep-seated Protestant activism that came from England, and it also shows that they brought with them what I call the poison pill of church-state relationship. After they defeated the king, they established a religious republic in England, and it failed miserably. It wasn't a failure on every level, but it failed miserably on the most important level. It lost the support of the people.
Right.
And when Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector, died, people had had enough of, again, shades of the Taliban, they'd had enough of kite flying figuratively and dancing literally forbidden. It was killjoy sort of religiosity. So they invited the king's son back, and he was called the Merry Monarch because wine, women, and song. And then the king immediately sent out orders to round up and kill those that had been behind the execution of his father. Tens of thousands of revolutionary Puritans fled this country at that point, as I say, one lifetime before the War of Independence. And the other factor that's worth mentioning that clearly laid the groundwork for the American Revolution was the First Great Awakening. that was one generation before the war with England. And it seeded a Protestant fervor in the United States, in particular, obviously, the 13 colonies, the northeast. Those colonies were seeded with a deep-seated religiosity that had to have been coloured by this sense of the promised land and a godly republic or a godly government.
But in fact, at the same time, not cutting you, at the same time, they brought some of those same principles that they abhorred in England. They brought them here and began to establish colonies, in a sense, to prohibit what happened in Europe when they were duplicating it.
Now you're getting to human nature.
Okay, right.
I don't care whether it's Protestants, Catholics, Muslims, Hindu, whatever. When there's a dominant religious faction, they tend to try to order the world only for their faction. Religion without godly spirituality is always a very dangerous thing, and this is what we're living through in this world.
That's right.
I think spirituality in the world is at a low ebb. I love to quote that poem of Matthew Arnold where he says, faith is receding like a melancholy roar. I believe that, but religion, the identity politics of religion is running amok all over the world. And this is what happened. Remember, these settlements were a pietistic sort of religion that had this sense of establishing their own little world. It wasn't a country in their view, it was the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Right.
And within that colony, you couldn't talk freelance about religion.
No.
You didn't challenge the minister's view. As it had been in England, if you didn't go to church on Sunday, you would be civilly punished.
That's right.
Fine at first, then maybe the public stocks where they throw rotten tomatoes at you. And it went from bad to worse in Boston. They hanged Quakers.
And what happened was...
And Quakers were the most benign, simple people. All the Quakers did was speak publicly about their views.
But what's amazing, now we come up to a nation that began to be reestablished. Talk about Roger Williams, for example.
Well, Roger Williams, and you may not know it because it's not emphasized, Roger Williams was a friend and confederate of Oliver Cromwell, the ruler under the Puritan direct rule. And he was an adopted son of Lord Coke, the chief jurist of England, Chief Justice, who was the one that came up with the statement that doesn't resonate the same in the US, but it's just as legally important, that an Englishman's home is his castle.
Okay, that's where that
And
came.
that's what got things started in the United States. There were two things that started the 1776 reaction. Was the quartering of troops in the home. It offended people that their sense of home and hearth was offended, and then the other was that they weren't allowed to issue their own money, so there was a business objection. But the average person was offended by this, overbearing government view. But Roger Williams was also on the inside of the philosophical views of that time. John Milton.
Okay.
The second greatest author in the English language, wrote Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and other great poets. And Areopagita, I'm never quite good on saying the name, but the most succinct defense of the freedom of press and of speech, that was at the same time. Roger Williams actually helped Milton with some of his language studies. So he was on the inside circle of this revolutionary faction. And when he came to the colony, at first they offered him the ministership of the main church there. But when they discovered his views, he more and more became alienated because his views were the baseline views of Puritanism, but that had run amok with political power. Baseline views that the individual stood before God.
That's right.
That you could not force religion on other people,
That's
that
right.
all religions and tolerance should be allowed. He also was a forerunner well before his time in understanding the rights of the native inhabitants. He was very charitable toward the Indians and dealt with them as fellow human beings, bought the land from them.
That's right.
Lived with them for a while. He's really the best model
For religious
for
freedom.
religious freedom and for what we see as the American dream, the American Christian Republic concept.
Right. You live within the confines of your convictions without forcing it on somebody
Right.
else. And that's a big challenge that takes place. You know, when you think about that, when you think about those challenges that come, living within the confines and not understanding that my rights are just as important as your rights, and your rights are just as important as my rights. But what's happening in America? Let's talk about that for a moment, because right now you have this, it almost seems as though there's a, well, I actually shouldn't use the word seem, there's an atmosphere that this nation is a Christian nation, and we're not going to let any other influx change that reality.
There's a bit of a syllogism being foisted on people. It was a good political slogan, "Make America Great Again."
Right.
But it's been defined poorly. So we need to look at what made America great to start with. It's not what's being said. It's not strength, political, military strength. It's not marginalization of other peoples. It's not even marginalization of other religion. And before, I don't know if you're going to have a break, but I need to get this in a quick conjunction with this. What's really passing for religious liberty at the moment in the United States is more and more religious entitlement for a certain view of religion, not for all faiths.
True. And that's why this passage in Revelation 13 is so significant, because it brings us in the middle of the picture between Rome, it's crumbling, you know, the Dark Ages, the Pope being taken in captivity, Roman
by Napoleon's general, Berthier.
Right, and for whatever reason, from 1798 to 1929, it seems to be almost a shell or a skeleton of what the Roman Empire was, until it began to come back into resurgence. And Lincoln, as I look at that, you have 1798 to 1929, but then you have the Seventh-day Adventist Church being born, the disappointment of 1844, then 1863, the establishment of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Quick view of history.
You know, very quickly. And then you have this rise of a message, the three angels' messages, which now brings people back to the foundation of biblical integrity. But then you have a nation now. You have 1776 before that, 1798, the Pope being taken captive, 1863, Adventist Church being established. Then you have religion growing in America.
You're getting at, there's a certain conjunction. The Bible, a number of times, particularly when Jesus appeared, spoke about the fullness of time.
That's right.
And I think you can easily make a case that the time that our church began was pivotal for the United States generally. It was the pregnant moment. In fact,
matter of fact, I want to give you that, because here in Revelation 12, when it says Revelation 12:14, because when Protestantism began to be emphasized and the Church of Rome began to flex its muscles in intolerance, they sought in many ways to redirect back to the church and its power. But the Bible says, Revelation 12:14, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So during the Dark Ages, God is preserving his church. Then America, its shores are opened up, because you find that the earth opened its mouth, swallowed up the flood, symbolic terms, that were poured out after the woman. In other words, this big push to get rid of religious freedom and to quell the Protestant Reformation. America now is born in Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. Another beast coming up out of the earth, having 2 horns like a lamb, but eventually speaking like a dragon. What are the 2 horns?
Well, an Adventist writer identified that as republicanism and religious liberty.
Yeah,
Protestantism.
That's right. And so you find these 2 things that defines the nation.
I better say, because any more people are become very politically polarized. Republicanism is not a party.
Thank you. It's a republic.
Where the power derives from the people. That's what defines a republic.
That's right.
And there's a few self-proclaimed republics in the modern world, but really, in reality, there was only the Roman Republic, the English Republic, and the American Republic. It's a very limited experiment where power derives directly from the people.
But this connection between the first beast of Revelation chapter 13, you know, the Bible says, speaking of the Roman power of the Dark Ages, the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. Revelation 12:9, the dragon described as Satan, the power from beneath, giving Rome this rise of tyranny and persecution for 1,260 years.
you're unpacking very quickly,
Right.
and some of our viewers may know it. But I'll short circuit to another basic truth that's behind this. When you're talking religious liberty, or when you're talking beast power and so on, it's pretty easy to cut through and unmask what's going on. If there's compulsion involved, it's not from God.
That's right.
And all of these beast powers and false systems dishonor conscience and are willing to force you.
That's right.
In fact, you're talking images. It's been very important for Seventh-day Adventists, as it was for the Puritans in Oliver Cromwell's time. They were studying Daniel too, the image.
That's right.
And when I look at the Church of Rome, it's not so much only a corrupt, doctrinally corrupt system. What I also see is just the echoing shadow, to mix a metaphor, of the old Roman Empire.
That's right.
And the Roman Empire was one of the most coercive, brutal, despotic regimes that ever was. It's, we see the Roman roads and the buildings and think that it was a benign time. The Romans were great. If they saw a people that opposed them, they would kill every man, woman, and child.
That's right.
And crucify people for tens of miles along the road as an object lesson. And the Church of Rome is the leftovers of the old Western Roman Empire.
Simply
The
put.
Bishop of Rome moved into that political vacuum and assumed even the pontifex
Yeah.
terminology. That's a Roman imperial term. It's not a church term.
No, it's not.
And so just as a matter of history, people should see that. I think it unmasks a lot of what's happening. And it can happen in many different ways. Religion easily becomes first the handmaiden and then the controller of the state.
Mm-hmm.
We see that many times around the world. And one reason we're having such a perplexing time with Islam is that it not only happens easily with Islam, it's demanded in Islam that the political ruler be the religious ruler.
Mm-hmm.
But Christianity fell for this allure in the dark days of the Roman Empire as it collapsed. And of course, Constantine set them up for it. But as it collapsed, and Constantine had moved to Constantinople.
That's right.
And left the Bishop of Rome behind in the crumbling ruins of the city of Rome with the barbarians. And people don't realize the barbarians were Christian, most of them.
Right, they were the ones that resisted any other tyrannical power.
They were just non-Bishop of Rome Christians.
Right.
And many of them were they were following a singular view of the Trinity. But doctrinally, things were a little muddled. But they were Christians. But Rome itself as an empire was collapsing, and Christianity in its Roman form answered the allure of political power, and it became as despotic as the old church, the old Roman Empire.
So you look at this picture when you pull all of history together and you just drop it on the floor and begin to sort through it. You look at what happened in the past, and as I think it was Winston Churchill who said that, I'm going to paraphrase, if we don't learn from the history, we're destined to repeat. So we're looking at this. He's not the only one that said that, but that's the most memorable one.
Well, all historians notice that. History doesn't repeat itself exactly.
Right.
But there's a cyclical
of
element to it, and when you feed in the same types of components, you're going to get the same result.
That's right.
Or put it another way, when you join church and state, you always get despotism.
Right.
It's inevitable.
So here we are.
And the early founding fathers understood that very clearly. There's any number of statements from Madison and Franklin and so on, and Adams, that if you give power to a certain faction of religion, they will persecute the other factions. And some of the most important documents, letters from the Danbury Baptists to George Washington, they saw that. And so they were asking, are you going to allow every faction to coexist? Because there was another faction ready to persecute the Danbury Baptists.
What happened when Kennedy became president, John F. Kennedy in America, it's overlooked as it comes to this present administration, because we were very concerned of his connection with Catholicism when he was being listed as the President of the United States. How has that changed?
Well, I remember Kennedy. I'm just barely old enough. And I can remember the panic that at least Seventh-day Adventists and some other Protestants felt at allowing a member of a church that had persecuted Protestantism to become president. To his credit, Kennedy gave some wonderful speeches about how he would allow, Pope or prelate or anyone, no one was going to dictate to America, that there would be a separation of church and state, and he was true to that.
That's right.
I'm not, just a clack for Kennedy. He had other deficiencies, but in this regard, he was right on the money. He kept a good separation of church and state, and I think the Catholic Church, which is of course made up of many individuals, so
right.
It's not a monolithic statement, but some of the bishops, 2 elections ago, I think it was, made a public statement that I found very chilling. They said that they had made a mistake with John F. Kennedy in not demanding that he follow the dictates of his church, and they would not make that same mistake again.
The Speaker of the House, if you remember his name, who was in position when Pope Francis came to Washington, D.C.
Yeah, John Boehner.
Okay. He faded.
He was Roman Catholic. Well,
he faded away.
We don't know the full story, but he seems to have been discredited and marginalized. I think there was a convergence that allowed the Pope to make that presentation because the speakers or the leaders of both parties were Roman Catholic at the time.
That's right.
And I wish our viewers realized how much of an aberration or a momentous historic act that was, because no other religious leader, forget popes, no other religious leader has ever addressed a joint session of Congress.
And how amazing it was that it wasn't even looked at as a violation of our bare principles here in America.
The only one that came close was the Dalai Lama had been invited a couple of years before, and there was such a furor that it was turned down. And the Dalai Lama, I'm not inclined toward Buddhism, but I find him a very benign presence.
Well, we're going to take more of this into the second hour, but we have been unpacking something that in the second hour we're going to look at in a broader sense where we are headed as a nation, what's happening in our country today, and why it is important to recognize the things that were established in Scripture to be a guide for us in the coming future. Don't go away. We have a lot to talk about. We'll be back in just 2 more minutes. Welcome back to the second hour of our July 4th special on religious liberty. We've laid the foundation in the first hour to give you an overview, looking at the past, giving you a glimpse of the future, and talking about religious liberty, religious freedom, a lot of the specifics that are happening in the world around us, as well as the nation in which we live. The second hour, though, we're going to give you a preview, try to narrow it down, if I could use the word. We're going to whittle at the end of the wood here and give a more focused picture of what we can expect based on Bible prophecy. Because in the midst of all of this confusion, as one of my good friends said, Doug Batchley, he says, in the midst of all this broken glass, there's a diamond. But to find it, sometimes you have to get your hand cut as you reach into the broken glass. Well, we have been in the broken glass for quite a bit of time, but there is a diamond, and that diamond is the accurate, reliable Word of God that we're going to talk about much in the second hour, which brings me to a song that I think is going to be amazing. A song by Wintley Phipps on Give Him Glory project that 3ABN recently released. It gives an overview of the Church of God in the setting of the crumbling world around it, the rise of Babylon, Christianity falling apart. How is God's church going to rise out of the ashes of what's falling down around us? Listen to the song, but as you listen to it, listen to the lyrics, particularly God's glorious church.
After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. The shining jewel of the ancient world, Babylon worshipped gods of stone. Power and pride were evil twins that ruled her heart and throne. She was likened to a harlot. Fornication was in the wine that filled the cup from which she drank, sins of every kind. The golden head of Daniel's vision would topple given time, as would nations, kings, and merchants intoxicated by her wine. The prophets tried to warn her, heed the writing on the wall, turn from her wicked ways before the day the wrath of God would fall. Oppressor of God's people, Babylon so powerful and strong, she thought she was invincible, but God would prove her wrong. An angel filled with glory shall descend with a shout proclaim, Babylon the great is fallen, she will die in sin and shame. Another voice from heaven will be heard across the earth to give a warning loud and clear to those who claim to be God's church. Come out of her, my people, be not partakers of her sin, for I'm coming back for a glorious church, undefiled and pure within. To him who worships me in spirit and truth and is faithful to the end, I will say, well done, a crown of life you've won. Come sit and reign with me throughout eternity. Thus saith the Lord. worships me in spirit and truth, and is faithful to the end. I will say, well done. A crown of life you won. Come sit and reign with me throughout eternity. Thus saith the Lord. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. God's glorious church. Amen,
Thank you so much, Pastor Wintley Phipps. What a powerful song.
Fabulous. Good,
God-
beautiful voice.
God's Glorious Church. We had two beautiful songs. We Are One for the first hour, Yvonne Lewis Shelton, and then God's Glorious Church, Wintley Phipps. You know, that song actually takes us through a synopsis view or a summary view of Babylon, its history, of Catholicism, of Protestantism, how it has crumbled, of apostate Protestantism, of all the quagmire of religion today, and out of all of that, God's glorious church arises victoriously. And you're seeing it as a person in the front
Right.
seat.
Well, things are shaking out,
Right.
and while it's never going to be the majority, the people are emerging that I think that have a good spiritual connection to God and are clear on the distinction between the power and the ways of man and the ways of God.
Mm-hmm. Now, what kind of influence is the world under now? Because America has now, it's not a diminishing country by any means. We are still flexing our muscles politically and religiously. Take us back to what's shaping up here in the near future.
Let me throw in a nice image.
Okay.
Before the break, I was reminding you. There's a wonderful cover of a few years ago of Liberty magazine.
Right.
I put it on the cover, but it was old even then.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in the 50s. An artist that the Seventh-day Adventist Church used a lot, but he also was used by the Mormons, Harry Anderson.
Yes.
Great artist, very much in the vein of what's the famous American painter of Americana?
Not Ansel Adams.
No.
Okay.
Anyhow, just classic Americana. There's a scene that he painted a painting originally for Liberty. I don't know where it was used, but we used it on the cover again. And it's a July 4th parade. And there's four little boys with fife and drum leading the parade through small town Americana. The spirit of
Is it Harry Anderson?
yeah, Harry Anderson.
Harry Anderson, okay.
No, Harry Anderson, but
Well, it'll come to us.
yeah, it'll
in a
come to
moment.
me. It's horrible to have a lapse like that. But he's well known to Americans generally, nothing to do with religion. So we put it on the cover, and I think that epitomizes the if you like, the innocent optimism that existed so long in America. And of course, it was played out against a backdrop of how church and state related. And many people thought it was secular, but really underneath it all was sort of a God and country in the right order. A wonderful mythic Americana sort of a viewpoint. And I'm sad myself because I think that's drifting away very, very quickly. There are many, many contributing factors. You know, clearly the spirit of the times all over the Western world, at least, is to leave faith behind. People are into consumerism. The stresses that have come on Western society, the immigration issues, and of course this present administration have moved big time into that. But you know that starts to make people think, how can I protect myself rather than, how can I spread the love of God to everybody? So you might think it's just a political movement, but it shrinks a religious sensibility, I think, when you have this tribalism writ large. And I just see America at a crossroads where the dream is being stifled. It's turning into something quite sinister. Of course, it can be stopped. Going back to the Bible and prophecy that you're talking about, there's not many hard and fast date points in prophecy.
Right.
These are things that are predicted because, a higher power knows how it's all going to work out. But often the prophets will say, unless you repent, this will happen.
Right.
And I do believe that if America, in a groundswell of Protestant purity, religious sensibility, essentially repented and turned back to its basic values, the evil day could be put off. I don't believe, even though the second coming of the Lord is something to be hoped for, to spend your life for it. We're to occupy till we come, and the life we live is respectable. So it would not be a bad thing if it moved away because the times had improved. And we could not only live more peaceful lives, we could use that time to tell more people about the coming of the Lord. But America could redeem the days.
Right.
The evil days don't have to be evil, more and more evil.
True.
But I think America's at the crossroads. On foreign affairs, it's dealing with raw power rather than projecting a moral agenda for the world toward freedom.
Less conciliatory.
I think in its society, the politicians confuse people a bit, but basically it's now back to the era of the robber barons. It's power. I had a long talk with someone taking the shuttle bus at St. Louis the other day. Nice bus driver. He happened to be black, but it could have been, any conservative political observer. And he told me at great length how it's wonderful that the wealthy are getting wealthy in the U.S., that the corporations got this incredible tax cut and so on. He says, when the rich get rich, he says, it's good for all of us. The money will come to us. That's just not true.
True.
It's never been true in U.S. in world history that poor people get more wealthy when the rich get more and more wealthy.
No. It separates, it creates a larger chasm.
It creates a larger gap.
Right.
And wealth per se is not in the business of sharing unless it has a Christian religious sensibility. And the U.S. was changed by very hard-fought laws to trim down corporations and then, of course, with the unions to make them honest. But there's a whole history that led us to where we are today.
That's right.
But to go back and think that I make the wealthy man rich and then I'll beg at the table, that's just antithetical to the American way.
It's not supported by Scripture either.
No.
Yeah.
And then talking about Scripture, too many of our Christian brethren in the United States have bought into the prosperity gospel, which is not truly biblical.
No.
Yes, of course, God will bless us in ways that might include money.
Right.
But money is not the primary blessing.
Not the key focus. And why is it that so many people are, and I think I know the answer to that because I speak against it, but I think that people are looking at this prosperity gospel in the sense of it's evaporating their responsibility to the true gospel. Because it's making the focus your faith. If you don't trust God, then you have an issue with faith, and God will. If you abandon your faith, then God cannot bless you materialistically and financially.
What I think, I wish we had more time to talk about some of these things, but I think there's a frightening correspondence through the prosperity gospel and other religiously informed conservative values, if you like. Correspondence between that and what I think is a global resurgence of basically eugenics. I'm trying to think of a better word to use, but that's the real word. The eugenics swept the world before World War II. The National Socialist Party in Germany put it into a bloody play-out, but it was everywhere. It was in the United States. And I believe in our age, some of the symptoms are how we treat assisted suicide, how we allow gratuitous abortion of children, how we not only ignore, decry the unworthy state of the poor, that they shouldn't have public monies and so on, how we marginalize immigrants / different race that are coming in, the other. All of this is really a manifestation of social engineering and an unchristian attitude that some people are more worthy than others. And the prosperity gospel is playing right into it. And I've heard many of these people on conservative talk shows saying that, why should I give my hard-earned money to such a person? It's mine, I earned it. That's in the United States.
But we are by the people, for the people.
That's the theory, and it's still a wonderful guideline or a marker to draw us on, but we're drifting away from it. And this is the challenge for the United States at the moment. Through public policy, which we spoke about earlier, we're more than danger, we're consciously, at least by public figures, heading into a very aggressive, secular program of might makes right, that we'll take it because we want to take it. Too many of the unthinking, even Christian masses, are going along with it. After Nuremberg, we held up the principle that even if you are asked to do something wrong, you should refuse. If it's immoral, doesn't matter whether it's the government or anyone.
That's right.
You refuse.
Refuse.
That principle's not there anymore.
No.
I
Because
hear it over and over again. It's not beyond my pay grade. I do what I'm told or whatever. This country was set up on questioning, not questioning authority because you don't like authority. That's nihilism or anarchism. The world went through a period of that around World War I. But still, the principle of the right of the individual and the moral responsibility that devolves on each person, regardless of what force tries to move on you, that's been lost, I think.
That's true. And what's happening in America is will it advance our cause it's almost becoming the only consideration. Will it help us? Will it strengthen us? Rather than is it right?
Right. And I just think the moral component needs to be reinserted in the United States, where it was there from the beginning. Obviously, with all human endeavors, it had its ups and downs, but it's been a constant that's largely disappeared, in my view. We're seeing the final days of true altruistic morality.
So love your neighbor as yourself. How does that get so watered down in a nation that claims to be a Christian nation?
Well, I think a turning point for the United States, it was a turning point for the world, was the collapse of the Soviet Union. With religious liberty, an awful lot of the things that were argued about internally, other than religious accommodation in the workplace, which is enduring, and that's a whole other discussion. But a lot of the church-state issues, with Ten Commandments posted here or there, or declaring loyalty to the U.S., Pledge of Allegiance. Most of these things date from the Cold War, when it was very easy and necessary for us to posit ourselves as a godly Christian community versus godless communism.
Right.
When the Iron Curtain fell, and more literally, the concrete walls around West Berlin, when they collapsed, suddenly there was no overwhelming need to position ourselves that way. And I think a hardening came upon the West generally and the United States hard. And it's not that we can't recapture it, but it suddenly was not so necessary to welcome every refugee. It was suddenly not so necessary in all our dealings with other countries to insert a Christian morality. Now we were just doing what we thought was necessary for the country as a whole. That was never the case in dealing with communism. There was always this moral component. And remember, President Reagan could speak about the evil empire. And George Bush Jr. Tried it, but it was already ringing a little hollow by then because
That's true.
The old evil had faded away. What he really was talking about was a difference of religious viewpoint. And because that's the secondary channel to a lot of what's happening now. I think myself that while all religions have every right to exist, and we should encourage religious diversity in the sense, not encouraging the diversity, but allow and bless all seeking toward the divine. I think now we're in a similar dynamic that existed at the time of Martin Luther, where Western Europe was at mortal threat of falling under the Ottoman Turks. Islam was on the move.
Okay.
And today we have stirred Islam, and its worst elements are on the loose. So it's very easy to sort of piously say, well, we're the good Christians against the head-cutting Muslims and all the rest. So it's allowing basically a crusader mentality in Christian America. That's not right.
But it's acceptable.
Well, it's becoming more and more acceptable.
It's becoming more and more acceptable.
And you know, I'm not someone who's inclined to excuse all the things of any religion, least of all Islam. There's some very real wrongs going on that derive directly from some of the holy writings. But you know, we shouldn't imagine that whatever happens justifies us to either pervert our religion or to combine it with the state and think that by acting against this, we're acting righteously.
So how important is it then in all of this, you know, we talked about a lot of quagmire, the dust is flying everywhere, politically and religiously. What demand does it bring on us as Seventh-day Adventist Christians? How do we recalibrate our position?
I think for Seventh-day Adventist Christians, you know, I don't know all the answers, but from my perch, my perspective, editing Liberty magazine, I do think America needs spiritual revival, as is always the need of God's people through the ages, and those that make the profession within this society. This is not a uniformly Christian society,
right?
Which is half problematic, but you know, it was expected by the framers. But I think we need a spiritual resurgence. I think for Seventh-day Adventists, we need to get back to basics about why we are Seventh-day Adventists.
That's right.
We're not here to bring vegetarianism to everybody.
True, true.
We're not here to bring hospitals on every street corner, as good as they may be. We're not even here to just, you know, add to the general moral tone. We're here to give a prophetic voice to the times.
That's right.
And if these are dangerous times, the prophetic voice needs to be loud. We can give some meaning to it. You know, from history, forget prophecy, from history you can make a very good case that this is the twilight of empire for the American Republic. Not the end of the country.
No.
It's the twilight of empire. And the dynamic is the same. It's not that the US is finished. It may last 100, if time goes on, another 100 years, but it's at the tipping point. It's feeling threatened, it's feeling uncertain of itself, and it's lashing out in very disruptive ways in the world.
Well,
we can give some meaning to that prophetically.
That's right.
And you hinted at it before, you know, this lamb-like beast, a relatively benign presence that protected a principle of separation of church and state.
That's right.
Now it's forgetting its origins, and you know, like a thrashing beast is doing things that are really inimical to its founding principles.
Right.
And we need to speak to that.
Okay, now
And that won't go down well with everyone, but it might bring some clarity to the situation.
So I look at it this way, and I think this is a picture that the Lord has given to us. There needs to be a modern religious Elijah, a Martin Luther, that does not melt into the cracks of society, but maintains its priority, the three angels' messages.
Right.
In an hour where you talked about in the first hour, where why are we not proclaiming with a loud voice as we are given the priority to do?
Well, what are those messages, the three angels' messages that we've clearly identified in Revelation 14? There's a call to honor the Creator. There's a...
Preach the everlasting gospel.
And then there's a call that Babylon has fallen.
Babylon has fallen, which was previewed in the song that Wintley.
And Babylon is confusion.
That's right.
And we shouldn't have to prove it very hard. There's great religious confusion abroad.
That's
Just
right.
turn on, not this channel, this is the great channel, but you know, with all the televangelists, some of them saying, do this and you'll get rich. Others are got maps of the Middle East. If we invade or if we allow an invasion of Israel, God will come. Craziness. It's great confusion. Political confusion. And then there's the third one is a warning.
That's right.
God is,
That's right. Don't worship the beast or his image.
In a system that is ready to enforce religious edicts, that we're playing with fire, and God will come and punish those that so pervert his system.
That's right. You have them, Revelation 14, verse 6. Fear God, give glory to him. In an hour where glory is being robbed, it seems like the people are getting the glory. Whatever the leader of the mega churches, they get the glory. But the Bible is in essence saying, fear God and give glory to him. Worship him who made heaven and earth and the springs of waters, a call back to worshiping the Creator, which in fact, we know as Adventist Christians, that's centralizing once again on the Sabbath truth that's been lost in the quagmire of religion.
And I'll give some credit to the Roman Catholic Church in the document Laudato Si. It picks up on the environmental degradation. It picks up on the biblical theme of God being seen through his creation.
That's right.
As it says, the rhythms inscribed by the creation by the Creator in the creation. And it says along those same lines, the seventh-day Sabbath. That's great.
That's
Unfortunately,
right.
anyone that reads the document sees that it sort of gets muddy from then on.
Right.
And then it says something that is unsupported biblically. It says by keeping the Eucharistic Sunday, we're honoring Sabbath.
Right.
There's just
Establishes
no evidence for that.
Right.
Now, I think in a general sense, the seventh day, it wouldn't really matter whether Sabbath, Sunday, or Monday, Tuesday, or whatever. But to knowingly shift it from what God said to a day of your own choosing, that's rebellion against God.
That's right. Somebody just recently asked me, what purpose does the Sabbath serve? You have the 4 commandments. One of those, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Then you have the last 6, our relationship towards our fellow man. And the Bible clearly points out that it's a sign, it's a defining mark between God and his people for 2 reasons: that we recognize him as our God, Ezekiel 20:12.
It's a reminder.
And that we recognize that he's the one that sanctifies us, Ezekiel 12 and verse 20.
A memorial.
Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12 and 20. So it's a memorial of creation, a sign between God and his people, and a sign that he is the one that we recognize as the one sanctifying us. It's a definite sign, and in this day and age, Lincoln, where the world has settled on diversity, this is the one that says, remember, don't get rid of this sign.
Now, I don't think would ever be good for the U.S. or any other country to make it a legal mandate that you worship on any particular day.
Right.
Because then you're on this principle of compulsion. What's the statement? Someone persuaded against their will is unpersuaded still.
That's right.
So, why would that honor God if you don't believe in the Sabbath and you're required by the law to worship on Sabbath?
Exactly.
That's Pharisaism. But if we could, if the government could create a climate that encourages spirituality, which the First Amendment can do just fine, and a voice of Adventists and others from the Bible was able to bring people to their spiritual senses, a great revival could follow.
That's right.
But we know from the warning of Revelation 14 that there will be a severe compulsion under eventually pain of death. And why that should surprise us, I can know as a young person that seems sort of bad, but we see it all around the world now. There's countries, if you don't do what they say religiously, you'll die.
It's a fact.
And so humans are showing an increasing willingness in different systems, and I think the West is not immune, that if they get a fixated idea to legally mandate religion, watch out. The penalty might be extremely severe, and it will be anti-God. It will be a sign of the very end, and we should proclaim that.
That's right. So when we proclaim these 3 messages, you find here, you can't get rid of the picture of Revelation chapter 13. You have the risen, revitalized power of Rome now resurging in America. And we know that England and America are the last 2 holdouts on total Roman dominance in the world.
Absolutely. And that statement is easily supported by the testimony of Roman leaders through the ages.
Right.
Even in Liberty, we reprinted an article once on that quoted different Roman Catholic authorities saying that their goal was global dominance, and these were the only 2 countries that were an impediment against that. And it's not illogical that any organization, a church that aspires to global dominance, would talk that way.
No.
But it happens to be prophetic.
And the prophetic statement here in Daniel 7:7, talking about that fourth beast of Daniel 7, which was pagan Rome at the time, it says, and it had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So you saw that nation of Europe under the rule of Rome when 3 of those horns were plucked out, the ones that resisted the rise of Rome. Then Rome began its 1260-year unrelenting, persecuting power of subjecting all humanity. Then America comes into play, 1776, rises up.
You've skipped a few steps. But you're there.
Skipped a few steps.
Yeah.
But just the Lord opened the doors for America. But then now Rome, centuries later, follows in America, comes and gets a stage. And I want to say this to our viewers and listeners. You know, it seems strange, but sometimes we have to question these things. What is behind, and we knew this when we went to see the Pope speak in Washington, what is behind such a welcoming platform in a nation that was raised up in opposition to the powers of Rome?
Yeah, and
Protestantism.
You and I see it the same way, but all of that said, standing there, I was amazed that we could have come to such a pass. It just didn't compute.
Right.
That once Protestant sensibility seemed to have vanished.
Oh.
And one thing that bothered me, and I think it was emblematic of a lot of what was going on, the Pope chose to speak at some length of Abraham Lincoln. And I know my history. The Pope of Rome at the time of the Civil War was tilting very strongly against the North, saying some very rude things against Abraham Lincoln, and that the assassination was the result of a plot of, I think it was 11 people. 4 or 5 of them were hanged, including Mary Surratt. You could go and see the Matthew Brady photographs. So it's not a conspiracy. At the time, it was uncovered, a Roman Catholic plot to not just kill Abraham Lincoln, which they succeeded at, to kill Secretary Seward. He was stabbed and left for dead. Another one was to kill General Grant, another to kill the Vice President. It was a decapitation plot. You'll never know whether it was ordered by the Pope. That's not worth proving, but it was Catholic zealots, didn't like this Protestant America. The only plot member that wasn't there at the time that it misfired was Mary Surratt's brother. He was the only one who was in any way connected to the Southern cause. He was a Southern agent. He fled to Canada, sheltered by Jesuit priests, and went to Rome and became one of the Pope's bodyguard. The connection was immense. And this Pope's not responsible for that. I'm not suggesting that for 1 minute. That's history.
Right.
In fact, his predecessor in Memory and Reconciliation apologized for such things.
True.
But why would you wave it under their nose? You should be embarrassed by it. And in my view it was a test. Does America remember such things? Obviously not. Gone.
And the sad reality is we're talking about a church that will never relinquish its claim to infallibility.
Well, it can't. It's part and parcel of the keys of St. Peter.
Right.
Keys of heaven and hell.
So when you're dealing with the power in that sense, religio-political, not
yes,
solely.
And in Liberty, this is one thing I've got to be careful writing in Liberty. You know, we're talking now from a Seventh Adventist perspective freely.
Right.
In Liberty, it goes to all people, politicians, all religions. Our issue is separation of church and state, not whether someone's doctrinally right or wrong.
Right.
I mean, they have a right to be wrong.
Say that again.
They have a right to be wrong.
Okay, and that's something that's very vitally important.
We have to hold to that.
Right.
It's not tolerance. Tolerance is I'll bear with it as long as I can.
Right.
We have to defend the right of someone to believe or disbelieve whatever they want. True religious liberty can only flourish on that.
Now, don't forget your thought that you're going to follow that with. You remember that thought, right?
Well, I did until you said that.
Okay, good. But here's the point you want to make.
Yeah.
In America, we have to defend a person's right to be wrong.
Of course.
That's the basis of the freedoms that we have in America. And so many people think that, well, if you're wrong, it's my determined responsibility to correct you and bring you in line, when in fact my tyrannical views will awaken within you the very same thing your tyrannical views towards me.
Well, you've chased my thought from my mind.
Okay.
But I know what I was going to say. And the one thing that I've often remarked on in Liberty and editorials, and it's central, is with the Roman Catholic Church, which I've had wonderful contacts with them personally. I know many,
Right.
many, but it's very dangerous to the American system because it's a church masquerading as a state and a state masquerading as a church.
There you go.
I'm not misrepresenting them.
No, it's a fact.
When it suits them, they're in the UN as a state.
Mm-hmm.
Another time they'll take mass in the open air and speak spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
It comes with the turf. But when you have a country predicated on the separation of church and state, how do you deal with such an animal? Impossible.
And this is where the spiritual ignorance comes in. So much of what's in Christianity today is really based on spiritual ignorance. And so it's designing the prosperity gospel. It's designed to advance the cause of those who live for the materialistic wealth of society. And they're forgetting that when you ignore the picture that's being drawn, like the Bible makes it clear, it was different from all the beasts that were before it. This fourth beast of Daniel. Rome is different from all the beasts. It's religio-political.
When I was growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist, we often used to have presentations with the beast drawn, and because that was an artist's configuration. But one thing that's worth remembering, that the Seventh-day Adventist Church didn't dream up this scenario.
Thank you.
William Miller and others before him were featuring this, and at my favorite time period, the Puritans in England during the Civil War, they were big on the image of Daniel too.
That's right.
And they recognized they were right down in the feet of iron and of clay. Mm-hmm. But there's not been great dispute about what those images represented, starting with Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, Daniel says it to him. He says, "You're that head of gold."
You're the head of gold. Right.
So we know that was the first kingdom, and then there's not been that many major world kingdoms since.
That's right. Babylon, Medo-Persia, then Greece, then Rome.
And the feet of iron and of clay. In early Adventism, one of my predecessors, A.T. Jones, the first editor of the Church for a Religious Liberty Journal, I read recently that at a general conference session, they discussed the 10 tribes that made up modern Europe. The 10 toes, in other words. And someone else Uriah Smith tried to explain it, and A.T. Jones jumped up and he says, "Brother Smith may not know who the 10 tribes are," he says, "but I know." and the spiritual guide of our early Adventist church, Ellen White, says, "Easy, Brother Jones, easy." So some things are not worth arguing about. Who the toes are, we don't know, but a mixture of strength and weakness clearly is the modern world. And strong enough to hold up an edifice, weak enough to give way before the kingdom of God that will replace all of it.
That's a very good analogy. Strong and weak at the same time.
Yeah.
A combination.
But there's certainly a diminution of value, gold and
silver, bronze,
iron. Iron's very strong. If you're dealing with just strength, iron's far superior to gold.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because when you look at the biblical unfolding of the nations, you have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, then iron and clay. The nations are losing their value, but they're getting stronger materialistically.
Yeah.
So you find we're living, and I want to get this picture clear to you, we're living among the strongest period, yet the foundation is weak because it's iron and clay.
Right.
You see, the iron's there, but it's clay, and it cannot hold up permanently.
And ironically, when you combine strength and all the rest, then you're only as strong as the weakest part. And we could
the weakest link.
give a whole sermon about if the foundations be not strong from the Bible.
Right.
And so if you don't have a good faith foundation, I think just a strong militaristic U.S. or any other system will fall.
That's right. If the foundations be destroyed, what will the righteous do?
Right.
That's a powerful precursor to where we're headed as a nation. Now let's get back to where does the church, the final gospel message, how does it fit into all of this, and how does it rise to importance in the midst of all of this confusion?
Well, Jesus said that this gospel of the kingdom will go to every kindred, nation, and people, and then the end will come. Mm-hmm. I often say that on a certain level that happened within a lifetime of his crucifixion.
That's right.
So I don't think, narrowly speaking, we're waiting for a sort of a magic moment when it's completed. I know our church at different times when I was growing up fell victim to that. They'd have a list of countries that we'd gone into. But Jesus explained the end of time. He says, wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes in diverse places, famines, pestilence. He pretty much might as well be talking about the daily newspaper.
That's right.
But he says, this is not the end.
That's right.
And then he says, then they'll deliver you up to be persecuted for my name's sake. So what I think we're beginning to see more than at any time since the Reformation period is great religious contention and violence. ISIS is nothing but a religious manifestation.
Intolerance.
An element of political aspiration, but it was just religious zeal and murderous zeal. But it's not just them. The Hindus are rising up in India against the Muslims. The Buddhists in Sri Lanka against Christians. I mean, the world is in religious turmoil.
That's right.
And these are what Jesus predicted. And he also gave a promise. You know, many promises of Jesus, some of them wonderfully calming and satisfying. But one he said is, all who live a godly life will suffer persecution. And we don't want that. You know, what group or what individual would want to be persecuted? But it says, count it as glory when you suffer as the Lord suffered. That's so right. I think that's the moment of culmination that perhaps is just around the corner for us, where on principles of our faith to proclaim that the Lord is Lord, that his kingdom is coming, and that it changes our lives, and others can join with us and be part of that remnant. That may mean our life or certainly great hardship, but that's the challenge before us. And perhaps even for the U.S., but why not? The U.S., there's a great myth of the West, well, it's not the myth, the westward expansion, the manifest destiny. It was hard for those people that went out and made sod houses in the plains and so on, but it's what made America great.
That's right.
And they laid the groundwork for the recent greatness of America. Why not grasp that for the Christian endeavor? The Lord is coming sometime soon. The conditions are ripe, especially in the United States. We need to be the frontiersmen to proclaim the Lord's soon return.
That's right.
And you know, we'll have to circle the wagon sometimes, other times move out to the frontier, but take the message everywhere while the time is short. You know, we were also told in the Bible, redeem the days because the days are evil.
Redeem the time, the days are evil.
Make some value of them.
That's right. And if you look at the cadence, every time the world gets dark, it's the moment that the gospel must rise out of all of that dust. Isaiah 60 verse.
And it only takes a few people.
No, it doesn't take many. You're right.
I'm drifting from Christianity, but think about the Russian Revolution. It was Lenin and a couple of people on a train. The West sent them in there just basically to make trouble. And he was sent in there, and next thing, the whole country's convulsed and changed and turned into another system.
Well, didn't the songwriter say it only takes a spark to get a fire?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So what we know today.
It's been proven over and over again that a small seed of a powerful idea with a couple of individuals can change the world. And like Gandhi and his peaceful protest, that fed straight through to Martin Luther King in the U.S.
So what's preventing that from taking place? Is it the fear of the reprisal of the majority over the minority?
Well, it's multifaceted, but we have to break free of all these inhibitions.
Right.
We have to stop protecting ourselves. We have to see faith as less defensive than offensive.
Right.
You know, Ellen White put it beautifully. He says, we're not yet the church triumphant. We're the church militant.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, we cannot allow...
We have to do and dare.
And we cannot allow societal norms that have been accepted to be the mute button for us.
Right.
For those who proclaim the gospel.
And situation ethics, we don't talk much about it, but we're big time into it.
That's right.
Popular wisdom and the frown of the public because you speak a little bit out of line. We just have to ignore that.
This gospel, Lincoln, is what religious liberty is all about. And once again, reiterating that for those of you who've been listening to the program, we've been talking about a number of facets of religion, politics, what's happening in the world. But Liberty Magazine, its purpose is to let people know that liberty for all, you know, that's part of our whole...
And since you give me an in to talk about liberty briefly, you know, we take it from several levels. There's the constitutional level.
That's right.
There's no embarrassment about arguing for religious liberty from the U.S. Constitution and history. It's written in there.
That's right.
There's the record of history, and that's why I was invoking the English Puritan Civil War and the Republic and so on, and the Reformation. And then there's the theological line from the Bible and the biblical principles. We're not imposing that on history, but by liberty going out to thought leaders, which involves politicians, mayors, lawyers, and so on, maybe your neighbor, we can get them with a whole waterfront of ideas. It's not just, because the Bible says that you should do it. To me, that holds the greatest weight. But you can start with where someone has respect for the law and see it's all tied together. And at root, this principle of religious liberty, while it's protected civilly, is a spiritual dynamic that derives from the Creator.
That's right. And so Liberty Magazine is a magazine that is, from a general perspective, designed to reach into many facets of society. As a guiding principle. I think of it as, you ever go to the mall and you see that little thing where they say drop a coin and you watch the coin just spin and spin.
The wishing wells.
The wishing well. You watch it spin until it just disappears in the hole. Liberty Magazine, and I'm using a very loose analogy here, is saying let that coin, it's going to narrow down the issues as you continue reading it, because the issues are really narrow, but you have to come at it from a very broad perspective.
That's a good point, yeah.
There's only one, that little penny reaches through a small hole, but it begins on the circumference.
And those wishing wells work, by the way. One of my previous jobs was editing a drug education journal, and we had at that time about 20 full-time, we called them literature evangelists, that were usually selling into schools, but a couple of them made their entire living by maintaining wishing wells.
Wow.
Only a handful of wishing wells will support someone.
Right, because you have to just watch that coin.
And yet, I don't see people using it much, and when they do, it's a 10 cent or 1 cent. But it adds up. And so each one of us, we might seem like we don't have much of a vehicle. I mean, this is a great vehicle talking on this program.
That's
but
right.
The average person doesn't feel empowered to make a difference. But just talking to your neighbor may talk to someone else, and that other person may talk to 2 or 3 people. The ability of a motivated every man or every woman is unlimited to change the world for the better.
And that's why Liberty is so vitally important. Liberty Magazine is so vitally important. When you get it into the hand of your thought leaders, a lot of people say, well, how can I affect what's happening in America? Well, just go right back to history. It only takes a spark to get a fire going.
You don't know that moment, but we have to prime the pump.
Your local thought leaders, your pastors. This is a magazine that should be in the hand of pastors, because people that are preaching from week to week from whatever pulpit, whether Sunday or Sabbath, are going to be people that are affecting the congregation. And if their minds are not guided by the reliable issues that are surrounding us, which, I appreciate Liberty Magazine, that very famous cover with the 3 little boys on the cover.
It's fabulous.
Fabulous.
I have the original painting in my office, by the way.
Yeah.
It's about 2 foot by 3 foot. Beautiful scene.
And because we travel worldwide, I must say this, I know you're from down under. Yeah.
Originally, but I've lived most of my life in the U.S.
I must
can't get rid of this, the tremble of the tongue.
It's quite all right.
Yeah,
but
you'll be right, mate.
It's go right. But the beauty of America is, while it is in fact quibbling about many things that really wouldn't amount to a hill of beans, it is still a nation that the Lord brought into existence to primarily accomplish a particular cause, which we must as a people not forget. We must not forget the gospel given to us to proclaim to every nationality. We must not allow our nation to become intolerant.
Right.
We must not become a people that say the gospel is only for a certain sector of society that agrees with us. Liberty means liberty and justice for all. For all.
And it's interesting you mentioned intolerance, because I think we're going through a bad phase.
Right.
And anyone that's studied U.S. history knows that this is not the first time we've had such a phase.
No. There's
been at least half a dozen severe periods of othering. But we need to shake this off.
That's right.
We need to shake it off. And I believe we can with the true, in our perspective, the true Christian attitude. But even non-Christians can exemplify it. It's not selfish, it's other-oriented.
That's right. I think that one of the blessings of a crisis is this. All of a sudden, the curtain of separation just immediately evaporates, because we are all in this thing together. We're all pulling for the survival of one another.
And there's 2 answers, or more than 2 answers, but in this regard, 2 answers. I've mentioned one, the need for spiritual regeneration.
That's right.
Personally. Not mandated by the president or anyone. They can't do it. And God's in control of that, but people need to open their hearts. But I believe knowledge is very important, and we started talking about the U.S. Constitution. I would encourage the viewers, read the U.S. Constitution for once.
Right.
I'm not really sure people read it. As I think I said, they confuse it with the Declaration of Independence.
That's
read
right.
that too, but know the Constitution. I think I remarked to you in one of the breaks, I was listening to a radio program and they were talking about the special counsel made a comment that they didn't bring charges against the president, that they didn't want to. And he says, therefore, why are you worrying? Well, that person hasn't read the Constitution. It's called impeachment.
That's right. That's right.
And even in going back further, so I won't say inadvertently anything against this administration, but in the year 2000, when we had a dangerous election, people didn't seem to read the Constitution. It lays out a very clear plan for the House of Representatives choosing the president if it's deadlocked.
Right.
And even before that, the Electoral College can decide. They don't have to vote who they're promised to. If there's a problem, then in their confederation, they decide and they can vote. And I'm not saying whether it was right or wrong how it turned out, but the point is at the time people clearly showed nationwide they'd forgotten the Constitution.
Right. And so here we are in a country called America. And God has given us this platform by which to invite every person of every nationality and every race to come into our steaming shores. What can we do to establish a better relationship as a church in America as we close this out?
You mean Seventh-day Adventist?
Yes, Seventh-day Adventist.
Seventh-day Adventist, I think the best, most honest thing we can do is, as Ellen White advised us, sail under our true colours.
That's right.
Not try to disguise what we're doing.
That's right.
Now, there's a matter of protocol. You don't beat people on the head all the time. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, do this or whatever.
Right.
But it should be as naturally as possible, communicate who you are and what you're about.
That's right.
And I don't think it's always to our advantage to have a prophecy seminar that passes as Egyptology or anything like that. We need to, you could have the same words brought to you by your friendly, your neighborhood Seventh-day Adventist church or whatever.
Right.
Ellen White says people have a right to know who we are. Unfurl your colors. And our colors are not Adventism.
No.
Which we should remember.
That's right.
Our colors is the banner of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
And the salvation for all.
That's right.
In fact, Adventism was never meant to be a church. There's nothing wrong with it being organized as a church. It's a movement.
It's a movement.
It's a state of mind. It's a response to the times.
That's right.
And even with the organization, we know that at some later point when things are starting to really fall apart, it'll be whoever answers to that faith description that will be what you might have once said Adventists. It'll be those that can look up when the Lord comes and say, here is our Lord, we've waited for him.
That's right, Isaiah 25:9.
Never says that the Adventists looked up.
No.
I mean, there's that little joke about Adventists in heaven, and the guide's showing someone around, and Adventists are there, but be quiet. They think they're the only ones there. We're not going to be the only ones. Or if that were to be so, we've failed.
That's right.
We're to be those that gather others to come with us.
The Lord said that, Paul and Barnabas said that to the Jews in Antioch. They said, it was necessary that the gospel should be given to you, and that you be a light to the Gentiles, and be for salvation to the ends of the earth. But seeing you judge yourselves unworthy of everlasting life, lo, we turn to the Gentiles.
Yeah,
and
good comment.
So God has given us the importance of carrying this torch. We are leading in the Olympics, saying this is the gospel. It's cradled in the love of God, but it's a message for salvation for all people. And it's not intolerant, it's inclusive.
Absolutely.
And God has given this nation the responsibility of preserving religious liberty.
I like the Declaration
which is a part of
Independent. Nature and nature's God. It wasn't as definitive as it could be.
Wow.
But our common thing is that we're creatures of a creator.
That's right.
And all of this is to vindicate his original intention and to return to Daddy.
Wow. And so I tell you, we are winding up on our second hour here and on this special July 4th program, but I want to thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
I would encourage those who are watching the program, what's the website?
LibertyMagazine.org.
LibertyMagazine.org. Whatever your denomination, it's a it's a dynamic magazine to have in your possession, to be aware of the times, what's happening in politics and religion, and our part that we can play to get the people of this world ready for the coming of the Lord. He that shall come will come and will not tarry. And one day, there's going to be a fireworks show in the heavens far greater than July 4th when the Lord comes back to claim his own.
Absolutely, yeah.
We look forward to that day. We do our part to get ready for it. And God bless you as you also get ready for that final day. See you again.